Good afternoon and welcome to our NeuroBox webinar, How to Lead and Support Disabled and Neurodivergent Remote Workers Effectively, with myself, Dr. Deborah Leveroy, and guests Dr. Christine Grant and Bronwyn Thompson. It's great for us all to be together today. It's Neurodiversity Celebration Week, so it's going to help us to really reflect on those themes of from awareness to action, thinking about how we can navigate awareness of remote working environments and create effective remote working. The chat is open for conversation. Please tell us a bit about yourself, where you're from, why you signed up for the webinar, what you'd like to get out of it. There's also a Q&A box. Please pop your specific question to us there so they don't get lost in the conversation, and we'll review questions in the second part of our time together today. I'd like to welcome our guests, Dr. Christine Grant and Bronwyn Thompson. Dr. Christine Grant is an occupational psychologist and associate professor at the Healthcare and Community Transformation Research Centre, Coventry University, and an associate fellow at the Digital Futures Research Centre, University of Sussex. Christine is a leading researcher in the field of remote working and the inclusive workplace. She's widely published and has written the book Agile Working and Digital Wellbeing in the Digital Age, alongside developing guidance and toolkits, including the remote working toolkit we're going to be talking about today. Bronwyn Thompson. Bronwyn is a senior learning and development partner at UK Atomic Energy Agency, specialising in executive coaching, leadership and management training. They have a keen interest in neurodiversity and have been working with Chris for the last 5 years, as well as undertaking leadership roles in disability networks across industries. Bronwyn's goals are to help leaders and managers to be curious and to take time to work with their teams to create truly inclusive environments. Welcome to you both. Delighted to have you with us. So today we'll be drawing directly from the Line Manager Toolkit for Disabled and Neurodivergent Remote Workers, and we'll be exploring why remote working can be a powerful and positive adjustment for employees and how it supports well-being, productivity and retention, the challenges and also the considerations that can arise when working remotely and how to manage them thoughtfully, how to facilitate regular, meaningful conversations about remote working needs with confidence and also clarity, identifying effective remote working skills and competencies for managers, and supporting people to flourish, not just to cope in the workplace. Everyone attending today will receive a copy of the toolkit along with a recording of the webinar. So Chris, can I turn to you first? Could you tell us a little bit about the research context, how the research came about, and what was the challenge it set out to address?
Hi, yes, absolutely. So interestingly, the way this research first came about was that I was presenting at a conference back in 2021, so we were well into the pandemic, and I was talking about virtual leadership. And at the end of the talk that I gave, someone asked me, I have an autistic remote worker, because many of us were remote working at the time, could you offer any specific guidance for me as a line manager? And actually, I've been researching remote working for around 20 years now, and I couldn't answer that question. So it created a sort of a gap in the research, actually. I thought, right, I need to get some funding now. And so the project that followed that was called Remote for All. And it was a series of qualitative interviews where we gave a voice and we looked at the lived experiences of disabled and or neurodivergent remote workers. So we looked in detail there, and that research actually gave a big gap. We found that there was a real gap in line manager knowledge, but we also found, as Deborah has also said, that remote working does benefit this group and this community of workers considerably for many of them. So we wanted to carry on with the research, but the line manager support was definitely lacking. And also we wanted to focus on the sort of well-being and also what we could actually produce, something useful that would be helpful to line managers. So that's when we started on work on the toolkit, and we did another series of interviews with line managers and neurodivergent disabled people, and we looked at what support we could offer. So that was the main focus of that second part of research. All of it is evidence-based, and that's a real key feature of it. and we've had a number of very large stakeholders involved in the project throughout. So that was the important aspect there. And this really triggered the toolkit to be developed. So I think that gives a good context. And we obviously had some really great funders who sort of supported us through this as well, Deborah.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks. I think that starts us off really nicely with that context, to really start thinking about why remote working can be such an effective adjustment when it's done well, of course. Bronwyn, if I could turn to you, could you give us an overview of the case for remote working, why it can be an effective adjustment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose this is kind of a pre-pandemic view. But sometimes we might think of remote working as like a perk, something that's kind of a reward that we can give our colleagues, for doing well or showing us some kind of level of performance. But for many, and I suppose in this case, particularly disabled and neurodivergent workers, remote working can really be a hygiene factor rather than anything else. It can act as quite a fundamental adjustment to work to enable colleagues to be present, to contribute, and to work at their best while still conserving energy and preventing that poor health or poor well-being. And there's loads of reasons for this. So, having that option to work from home can be a really helpful way for people to be able to, manage their sensory overload, for example. So, I'm sure we've all experienced sitting next to someone who's taking calls all day at their desk, or what seems like it's 8 full hours. That can be quite annoying for some people, but for someone who, really experiences that sensory overload, that can be really, really difficult, and it can, completely reduce their ability to work. Similarly, remote working can be really helpful for things like energy management. So, allowing people to use their breaks to rest, properly, rather than, kind of sitting in the break room and being kind of almost still switched on to questions or still masking. And something that I'm sure we can all empathise with is that reduced commuting fatigue. For colleagues who are disabled, the energy needed for a workday can start, as soon as they wake up, preparing food, washing and dressing, navigating public transport, or, the horrors of driving and the uncertainty of, will I get a car parking space? That doesn't sound, perhaps, if you're able-bodied, that it would take that, or neurotypical, that it would take that much energy. But this can be a huge amount of energy for someone before their working day even starts. So I suppose going back to the case, when we can consider remote working when it's possible, it can really improve our colleagues' well-being, their productivity, and ultimately improve that retention and development of disabled staff. This obviously involves, and we'll talk about this more later, that mindset shift as a manager from needing to see, visibly seeing someone in the office as a guarantee of their productivity, to kind of shifting that way of thinking that, we're valuing what they deliver, wherever they're working. So the toolkit, Chris's toolkit goes into a lot more depth on this, showing how people can work better from remote working, not less. Obviously, of course, remote working does have its challenges too, so it does require us to be thoughtful about that too. I'll hand back to you, Deborah.
Thanks. Thanks, Bronwyn. Sorry, my voice has got a bit squeaky. Yeah, I mean, a great kind of overview of those benefits and really the case for remote working, and just a little bit of a nod there to the kind of the factors that really need to be considered and addressed to make sure that employees and employers, of course, get the benefit of remote working. So with that, let's kind of touch on the common challenges and also considerations that are highlighted in the toolkit from the research. And there are several. I will just touch on a few here. So we may think about the isolation and disconnection that the employees, the research participants articulated. They talked about feeling possibly unintentionally forgotten and feeling as a result undervalued as a result of that. They may experience social isolation and feel disconnected from the team due to fewer informal conversations that kind of really help with team working and team building. And individuals express that they sometimes feel there's a lack of recognition and even potentially a lack of promotion because of that lack of physical visibility. So work-life balance was another theme that came up again. So in cases where people hyperfocus, there may be the risk of overworking, the lack of potential structure in the working day, no refined or defined rhythms, so no fixed kind of start and end times, and possibly even no breaks. And we know that remote working does require specific skills for individuals to have the organizational tools and the strategies to be organized, and also the motivation to actually get work done. Lastly, an individual's needs may become less visible. So managers might not check in as regularly, which may make the employee feel that they don't matter. So there are several risks and also challenges for the manager with these specific scenarios. So the risk being that a manager makes an assumption that no news is good news, for example. There's the risk of the individual's needs being missed completely, or actually of being misread. And of course, the risk of over or under checking in. So very quickly, some top tips from the toolkit itself, practical ways managers can respond. So regular structured check-ins, things to think about. So ask the individual themselves how often a check-in is needed. Would it be helpful to arrange these regularly in advance, or provide a regular drop-in when people can ask questions? Whichever you choose, it's important to make sure you view check-ins as a priority to show team members that they're valued. Another suggestion is to really help the individual to identify parts of the role and the tasks that are best suited to the office environment. So, for example, these could be where peer support is needed, or you're having collaborative and creative meetings or client meetings. And then those tasks that are best completed at home. So they may be tasks requiring sort of high-level concentration skills, such as reading, research, writing tasks, for example. And lastly, supporting the individual to identify tasks that require a higher level of concentration and energy, and those that require low levels. So, for example, it may be that some people find different parts of the day more effective when their energy levels match the required level of concentration. So are higher level concentration tasks best scheduled for the morning, possibly, and lower level tasks for the afternoon? Or is it the other way around? But we know that, most issues aren't caused by remote working itself. That's what the research tells us, but it's actually about how it's managed and the lack of support for line managers themselves. So with that brings us quite neatly, I think, to one of the most important manager skills, having good conversations. Bronwyn, can I ask you, how can managers facilitate regular, meaningful conversations about their remote working needs with confidence and clarity?
Yeah, absolutely. So, having meaningful conversations about remote work, as Deborah has just said, is so, so important. Most people will value and be happy with, a genuine, open support questions from their line manager. So having these conversations doesn't have to always be a really big formal affair. It's just important that you have them. So, people's needs can change over time, particularly with disability. And there's huge value in just checking in every so often, because, as Deborah said, just because you're hearing silence doesn't mean that everything is totally fine. So, there's loads of reasons why people might not prefer to, proactively raise things. There might be some fear about how you might react, fear about how you might see them if they disclose something, ultimately fear that it could hurt their career. So by you as a line manager taking those steps to open the conversation in the first place, you can help reduce this fear and start by having those meaningful conversations. So, like everyone else, I'm going to do some top tips from the toolkit. So, first of all, make sure we're normalizing those conversations. So, as I said, don't wait for problems to arise to take steps. Having these conversations when everything's going well is super, super important to make them seem like it's second nature. No one wants to feel like it's a doctor's appointment. You're just two equals chatting about what works and what doesn't work. Also doing things like focusing on what helps you to work well rather than diagnosis is really, really important. So it absolutely isn't necessary for someone to share their diagnosis with you in order to get support. In fact, just asking, what helps you work well is really important. And it's, excellent line management practice, whether you are managing a disabled person or not. So it's all about work and what can be practically done rather than straying into that medicalized territory. My third tip is listening first and problem solving second. So this is a great way to work by really prioritizing that listening. More often than not, your direct report, your colleague, is going to know exactly what they mean, what they need. They might not know how that can work within their within your organization's context. They might not know how it can be possible, but they probably will know what it is they need. So your job is to listen and to ask curious but sensitive questions so that you can kind of solve that problem together. As a line manager, that is where you bring your expertise. Always thinking, ask, don't tell. That is the most helpful approach. And of course, there are also a couple of things to avoid. So number one, please don't make assumptions. Just because your friend's cousin's aunt has the same condition, it doesn't mean that your colleague is going to experience things in exactly the same way. Listen to what your colleague is saying and recognize that they're an individual person with unique preferences. This will help you create something that's specific and something that will actually work for them. Number two is avoid treating adjustments as a one-off. So adjustments are ongoing and they can evolve. Think of them like mini experiments. Until you've found the perfect solution, some iteration is going to be required. And of course, just to finalize, of course, you're not a medical professional, and no one really wants to go through their diagnosis with their line manager unless it's something they do want to, but no one wants to really go through that. It's uncomfortable, it's unnecessary. So keeping it work focused and thinking about what can be done rather than what can't be done is really, really a helpful way to make sure those conversations are as smooth and as meaningful as possible.
Thank you, Bronwyn. That was incredibly comprehensive and really, really clear. And I think, leading on from that, these conversations that you've kind of given us a framework for, and just to say, when everyone receives the toolkit, there's very detailed kind of guide about these conversations. But these conversations don't just sort of happen in isolation, but they're part of a broader understanding of what makes kind of good inclusive management practice, and that's kind of what we're going to touch on next. So Chris, can I ask you to talk a little bit about, I guess, what good looks like? How can you become a good line manager to remote and hybrid working teams?
Yes, thank you both. And yes, this is a really important point here. And we did dig quite deep in our interviews to find out what these might be, because we are looking for some things that are specific. And whilst we acknowledge some are also general line manager skills, we wanted to pull out what really means something here. And I think it's worth saying as well, just to sum up what both of you have been saying, is that it needs to be a tailored approach. And in order to have a tailored approach for anyone, actually, but very much so for this community of workers, we need to do certain things. And the first thing we need to do is to develop a trusting relationship. And that can take time, but it is very important. And that's through those critical conversations and having the courage to do those. And what we found as well was that line managers aren't always confident to do that. And they do feel that they lack the knowledge sometimes and the skills to be able to do that. So that's what this toolkit's trying to do as well, is to bring that to the fore and to support that. So we talked about the trusting relationship. That's about empowering. That's not about micromanaging. Many of our interviews were not happy with being micromanaged. It's a tendency to do that when you have remote working generally, but in this context as well, it really wasn't working. So that feeling of empowerment, understanding each other. And I would say one of the key aspects as well with this is, as a line manager, to actually understand yourself and to understand what you're bringing to this, any unconscious bias, exploring your own attitudes and looking at your own skills very carefully and looking at your own knowledge base. And Bronwyn said, you don't need to know everything, but you do need to ask some questions and you do need to show that you are gaining some understanding through the conversation. And it's all about empathy, not sympathy as well. That was one of the key quotations that came out of this as well. Very much a compassionate approach to leading was seen as very important here, as a critical skill, if you like. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. Bronwyn's going to cover some of the more detailed actual competencies. But I would say as well, what's really important and it comes out of all this research is a strength-based approach. So this tailored approach, job crafting, job carving even, working with the individual to see what works for them and bringing the best to work. And some of our exemplary line managers were doing this all the time. It might even mean looking at job descriptions again. It's the whole package. So getting the best out of it. And in terms of remote working, understanding what presenteeism means as well. Now, this is an interesting term which I've written on separate guidance on actually, which you can gain access to. But this is working while sick remotely, or indeed in the office or on site, wherever you might be. So this needs looking at as well as the line manager, because there is a big tendency with remote working to carry on working when you may not feel so well. And with this group, the pressure, maybe some guilt and things like that, maybe even more so. So it's definitely something the line manager should understand as well, to ensure that there is sustainable working so that work can continue. And we know that that's what this group wants, and we know that that's what remote working can offer many within this community. But also think about measuring on outputs, not so much on inputs. Working with, I think we've talked about maybe deadlines and assisting with things like that, understanding what's needed there. And overall, I'd say as a line manager, having that curiosity just to learn, to listen and to learn. I think those are the key skills as well. So I think I've covered many things there, Deborah. Perhaps over to Bronwyn to cover a few more in a bit more detail.
No, thank you, Chris. Thank you. I really love your focus on this idea of sustainable working, that remote working can itself be a factor that contributes towards sustainable working. Bronwyn, can I bring you in? It is going on a little bit more, but it's just extending what kind of Chris has said. Thinking about developing your skills as a line manager. What were the skills and competencies that managers need to develop in order to support this community of workers? I know that was a question that we put to the research participants during the research process. What do managers need in order to better support me as a neurodivergent remote worker?
Yeah, absolutely. And once you receive the toolkit, there's a really huge list of all the different, competencies and skills that we identified in this research that it's beneficial for line managers to have, as well as some sneaky tips and resources that anyone can access to kind of start building those journeys. So if, like me, you're in L&D, we've started to kind of suggest some bits and pieces that you might want to push out to managers to kind of support with building those competencies. So I think just to reiterate what Chris said, so the best line managers that we spoke to were using these skills absolutely regularly, daily in their interactions. And also, more importantly, they were always seeking to improve themselves, how they were working and what the working environment was like for their direct reports. So we're not saying that the best line managers necessarily have a 100% score in all of these competencies, but it's the fact that they were aware and they wanted to improve and keep developing that really made them those exemplary line managers. So calling out some of those which are listed on the slide, it's things like being able to actively listen, really hear what someone is saying. That ask, don't tell, but really hearing was very important, both for managers and their direct reports. Like Chris said, that empathy, not sympathy. So no one wants to be their line manager to feel sorry for them. It's a gross feeling, but you do want someone to understand, how you work well. It's that compassion as well. So thinking about how people might experience things and being a bit proactive about implementing ways so that people feel included without having to ask, and it's just there and it's available. Like I said, that being curious as well. And as you can tell, these aren't all about, having an innate knowledge of things. It's having a curiosity and a willingness to learn and really kind of fostering that in your relationships. That regular communication, it's something that, you can start that one right away. Again, that experimentation with, how regular do people want to be communicated with? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Do they prefer mini check-ins? Would they prefer something lengthy? It's that experimentation, and also just asking our direct reports what they think they might like and how that might work for us. yeah, and like we said, it's that gaining knowledge, that learning. Please do ask your disabled colleagues how they might like things. As I said, we usually know, we can usually tell you, and understanding what your direct report strengths might be. So often we might think of, people's disabilities in terms of deficit, but we can also really think about what those strengths might be and how we can really use those strengths as line managers to help people cultivate and build the career they would like to build by really harnessing those amazing strengths and building them even more fantastically. So, we know from the research that, the more compassionate and supportive a line manager is, the better the well-being and the performance of your disabled or neurodivergent workers might be. So, that productivity does increase when you take an autonomous approach, with the appropriate support. And it's just making sure that you've got that trust in place, you've got that curiosity in place, and the ability to ask, sensitive questions in a way that helps you build your confidence and keep learning over time. So yeah, I suppose the message is, if you're looking at this list and thinking, oh dang, I'm not sure I'm 10 out of 10 in all of these, that absolutely doesn't matter. As long as you've got the curiosity and will to learn and go out there and try, that is the main thing people were looking for in their line managers.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Thank you. I really liked your phrase around building those learning journeys and that idea that it is a journey and it's not just a fixed kind of destination, but we're all kind of navigating our own learning journey. So thank you for that. We'll just finish off now with a question around how can organisations help disabled and neurodivergent people flourish, not just cope in the workplace. Now, that might be a remote hybrid working workplace, it might be a physical workplace. But to finish off here, we're going to share what disabled and neurodivergent remote workers and line managers said could help this community of workers from the research, not only to level the playing field, but also to fully flourish at work. So key findings from the research focused on creating an environment that was supportive, being creative in finding solutions, being fully heard, and crucially, enabling everyone to work together in a fully inclusive working environment. Now, as line managers, our job is to be proactive and give our team members the opportunity to share and discuss how they work best. And I think that's one of the essential takeaways from Bronwyn and Chris today. But we don't need to be experts, but by listening and learning and going on those learning journeys, with reputable sources, that might be our HR department or our networks, we can practice allyship. And ensure our team members are able to flourish at work. Thank you very much for all of you who have posted and asked questions today. I can see that it's been quite busy and we're nicely on time. So we'll have a look through the questions now. So I have a question here. This is a very interesting question. What is an alternative to micromanaging when performance is in question? So what is an alternative to micromanaging when performance is in question? Chris, Bronwyn, you're nodding. Can I go to you on that one?
Yes, sure. I think, Chris, we can probably answer this together, can't we?
Please, yeah.
In terms of, I think it's a challenging situation to be in as a line manager, because at the end of the day, you're there to make sure that performance is in the right place. There are lots of things to think about. So obviously, I'm sure there's the steps that you've taken already. So, having those clear conversations with your employee about, the level of performance that's expected, but also using that curiosity, like we've already talked about, is there something that's going on? What could there be underlying? And kind of looking at fixing those root causes. I suppose thinking on opposite of micromanagement. So I suppose if we think of micromanagement and complete autonomy on a scale, there is somewhere in the middle for when we're looking after someone who perhaps isn't performing quite at the right level. So we might think about having more regular check-ins. It might be something that, having that mix. So you might have a daily check-in, so you're sure that they're on track for the day, but they're not micromanaging across the whole day, not, really getting in across the whole day and giving them the space to, prove to you that they can perform or prove that they, perhaps can't. But it's having kind of separating that out. So rather than you having to have that burden of being with them and holding their hand all the way, is setting up those times when people can ask questions, when they can come, when you can provide support, while still giving them that space to try, and to, have that space to improve. I don't know, Chris, was that sort of what you were thinking?
Yeah,
Or
yeah. And I mean, I am a long-term line manager in my own right, actually, as well. I've been deputy head of school and had, over sort of 100 staff where, I've been working alongside and working with in that capacity. So I do understand when performance isn't good, it is important to be speaking directly to the individual, and it is important to have that. I think this is where the empathy comes in, to try and understand what's underlying it. I would say 9 times out of 10, there's a reason for it, and it's being open to be able to hear that reason and to maybe summarize back and say, so it's this that might be not helping, or what else could we do to help? So it can be quite a long conversation, but I think it is important to have it. I do think also occupational health do play a role in this. So if there's a need to make a referral, then that should also be done here, and I've done that many times myself, of course. One thing I do find quite useful is to work with the individual to set some small steps, if you like, towards objectives, and to look at this, as we said very much earlier, about outputs. So what is it you need to produce in the role? What is it you can do? Can we break that down, make it easier to work with? That often works too, I find. So that is perhaps a little bit on the micro side, but not too much, because I think it's very much about the person saying what they think they can do. So I would say break down the tasks, spend the time talking, listening, summarising, and make referrals if they're necessary. I think, yeah, because there's always something behind it, always, nearly always.
that's the important bit, isn't it, Chris? It's
Yeah.
the difference between micromanaging and not micromanaging is the person still having a say and having a voice.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's
What can
keeping that
you do?
voice there.
Yeah. What do you think you can do? What's preventing you from doing? It's that sort of low. It's important questioning still, but it doesn't need to be do this or be overly directive, I don't think. But I mean, there are different
100%.
stages of performance management, as we know, so that can also vary and depend.
Thank you. Thank you. I really love the kind of the can-do approach. So what can you do as a manager, but also asking the individual what they can do. So making sure that they're an active part of that conversation. Thank you both. I'll move on now to our next question. So if an occupational health and access to work report recommended a short weekly one-to-one, so 10 to 20 minutes, to help time manage and prioritize tasks with an employee, and available time is limited, would an employer be able to state that that was not a reasonable adjustment? Oh, great question. It's a really good question. I'll repeat it just because it's a little bit long. So if an occupational health and access to work report recommended a short weekly one-to-one to help time manage and prioritize tasks with an employee, and available time is limited, so that's the problem or the potential problem, available time is limited, would an employer be able to state that this was not a reasonable adjustment?
I mean,
Deborah, do you have a view on that, given that's your kind of area? But my view would be that's quite a small adjustment to make. One
yes,
small meeting once a week seems small,
if you
but
can't find 10 minutes,
yeah.
I would be very, very shocked. Even if it's not you personally that can find 10 minutes, is there a buddy that can find 10 minutes? Is there a peer that can find 10 minutes?
I
Yeah,
wonder if this is an approach as well, where a mentor could be used as well, maybe a mentor or a coaching situation. We haven't talked about that a lot here, but so that could be helpful, where there's a mentoring conversation. If the line manager really is short of time, but actually I think that's quite minimal there. But I don't know the organisation and the time pressures.
I think sort of drawing on both what you've both said, I think, the question is why, why isn't that 10 to 20 minutes a week available? So what's going on that the manager feels that that time isn't available and isn't best spent? So that could be that actually the manager, the organisation needs a little bit of support with understanding what are the benefits of supporting employees, what is the benefit of adjustments, why are they there? So it could be actually even more fundamental. And I think, that sort of the final part of the question, would an employer be able to state that this was not a reasonable adjustment? I mean, obviously that's the $1 million question, but essentially, if an employer understands the legal context of the rights surrounding that individual and the employer's duty to put in place reasonable adjustments, a short one-to-one is not going to cost. It doesn't have a cost element to it, which is one potential test of an adjustment being reasonable. Can the employer afford it? So yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and it kind of brings up lots of other conversations and other things to consider. Yeah, no, thank you. Really interesting. Chris, Bronwyn, anything else to add before we move on to the last
I think it
question?
taps into what one of our line managers said about a principle of care and the way
Mm,
that you operate as a line manager. So,
mm,
getting that understanding of what that means and caring about others to make that time as well. So
mm.
it is surprising to see that, but also quite worrying, I think, if this is a question that needs to be asked.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I hope that the toolkit will be referred to anyone who's,
Mm,
time poor, but it is about making the time. It is. And it's
yeah.
crucial because actually that has knock-on effects that the employee might become more sick, might take sickness absence. So you may be saving 20 minutes here, but that
Mm,
the absence of 2 weeks longer, long-term absence even. So it
mm,
actually it should balance out really. Yeah,
mm.
yeah. There are
Thank you,
really
Chris.
the organisation for doing this. As
Mm. Thank you, Chris. And actually, this links not very nicely to the last question, which is kind of almost an echo. So the question is how to have conversations that could be positively constructive when there is a lack of engagement. For example, staff not putting in the time for one-to-ones. So framed in a slightly different way, not so much the kind of legal side, but we're talking about now engagement. So staff maybe not kind of being brought along for the journey of why it's important, to put in time to have one-to-ones. Essentially, there's a lack of engagement as the reason for not having these conversations.
is it lack of engagement from the line manager or lack of engagement from the employee, which or the staff member?
That's a good question. I don't have that. So how to have conversations that could be positively constructive when there is a lack of engagement, for example, staff not putting in time for the one-to-ones. So, I mean, it could be on both sides, actually. It's a really good point, potentially.
Yeah, could read that either way, I think. Uh,
Mm,
yeah, that's an interesting one, and it just ties back into everything we've said about the benefits of having these
mm,
conversations. They don't need to be long, they can be short, but they are important because otherwise, as we've talked about, they could lead to sickness absence, people not understanding what they're doing, and just
mm.
generally the situation getting
Yeah.
worse. Really. And just that's what I think. But I don't know, Bronwyn's got more to add.
Yeah, I think it's hard to know whether it's the lack of engagement from the employee or the line manager. If it's the line manager, I would be expecting within their job duties that they should be putting in one-to-ones with their staff. And I would probably say that line manager is underperforming if they are not able to have appropriate one-to-ones with their staff, if I'm going down the harsh route. But down the softly route, I would say whoever it's from, it's again having those experiments. If it's not something you're used to doing, but it's something that would be beneficial, it's building that level of trust with that line manager and that employee to say that, it's worth having a go, it's worth trying, it's worth having these conversations to see what productive comes out of it. Because if it's a space where we're not used to having one-to-ones, it might not be engagement, it might be a level of trust that's missing there as well. And it's having that sort of small, slow, having a go approach that can start building that trust or engagement, whichever one it is, that is needed to have those conversations. you're not going to expect someone to, be able to share everything about themselves straight away with a stranger. And by having those kind of efforts at, having those conversations, that's where the trust will build. It's not on the first day switch on kind of thing. It's putting practiced effort in over time. Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely get those one-to-ones in, even if they're awkward to start with. They'll get less awkward over time if there is that genuineness
It's
being
about
approached there.
it's in both situations, isn't it? Being confident your line manager is listening, but also
Mm.
manager to feel confident in having the conversation. So we've covered quite a lot of that here, and there's loads in the toolkit. Not with that, but that is a crucial part of this. And I think if the individual feels they're not engaged with their line manager and that can't work for some reason, then there needs to be finding another person to talk to about it. I think sometimes there needs to be an avenue, a mentor, maybe a coach, or maybe circumventing the line manager. Unfortunately, sometimes that does happen.
Thank you both. That's really comprehensive. A couple more questions that have come in. One is what determines what makes an adjustment reasonable? So this touches, I think, on the earlier question where it was deemed that a short, one-to-one may not be interpreted as reasonable by an employer. So what determines what makes an adjustment reasonable?
Do you want to take that one, Deborah, or would you like us to have a crack at it?
We can do it together if you want. I mean, it's a fundamental question that comes up time and time again in the sense of what is a reasonable adjustment. This term reasonable adjustment is in the Equality Act. There is a definition, but it's quite open for interpretation. And ultimately, what is reasonable to one employer may be seen as unreasonable to another for a number of reasons. There is guidance which we can post. Actually, it is in the toolkit, and there are several kind of tests, if you like, of reasonableness. So one of which is one we already mentioned, is the cost of the adjustment, and several others. Bronwyn, I don't know if you want to kind of come in and talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's things like cost. It's things like how much effort it would put into it. So, if you have to completely redesign a building, is that reasonable compared to, finding a different place of work? We'll have to have a think about it. It can also be linked to, how your business operates. So different factors will come in. So if you're a manufacturing business, there's going to be different things that are reasonable compared to, if you're an office-based worker. That's the hard part. It's super contextual about what is reasonable within a situation. But yeah, it's sort of that cost and effort. It's important to note, however, that, if you are coming from a really large business, the onus on what will be reasonable will be a lot bigger than if you are coming from, a very small organization, sole trader type kind of organization. So essentially, the bigger you are, the larger things are more likely to be reasonable. It's probably a small caveat, I suppose. But yeah, definitely check out the toolkit itself, because we list all the different factors that you can kind of measure things against.
And I think with that cost element, there is something in there around, being sure that you've really exhausted. If cost is your kind of factor for determining if something is reasonable or not, it's ensuring that you have exhausted all avenues to cover costs. So, for example, that you have explored access to work, for example.
100%, yeah.
So, yes. Great. Okay. Moving on to the next question. I think this is our last question. So I've been told in the past that time management and organisation is part of the role, and support for this is not an adjustment, and the employee should think about if the role is still suitable. Another great question. I'm going to repeat it. So I've been told in the past that line management and organisation is part of the role, and support for this role is not an adjustment, and the employee should think about if the role is still suitable. I'll just let that question land for a minute. I mean, great question. I'm sorry that that is the response that this individual has had. Bronwyn, Chris, I don't know if either of you want to take it. I mean, my question, obviously, you can't tell me the answer because we're, not you, Bronwyn, but the person that's posted is, I'd be so curious to know who told them that, because that's not, I mean, yeah, Bronwyn, I'll let you lead on it if you want, or I'm happy to put in
I think
some
I've yapped enough.
thoughts.
I think, Chris, do you want to take it, and I'll chip in after.
Role is time management and organization. So let's say it was an event management role or something. So the role, had a lot of it in it, and it was about managing other people's time as well. And so maybe there was a lot within the role, but I still would go back to this job crafting, job carving discussion about what elements can I bring to it? What are my strengths here? I'd also say that yes, you can get training in these things, of course, and I think we identify some of those in the toolkit as well. But of course, you can get training in that area. As to whether it's an adjustment, I would have thought, Deborah, this would align directly to the disability neurodivergence kind of support around that or legislation
Yeah,
around that. How
absolutely.
it's with that? So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think it's a question of, what is an adjustment? And I think, the perception might be that an adjustment is just to kind of the change to how things are done. But, when you look at particularly access to work, an adjustment is also defined as, having the support in order to develop those skills. So that might be strategy coaching,
yes,
which is part of access to work adjustments. So that might be when an individual has strategy coaching and you may develop skills in time management and organization. So just because it's something that an individual may struggle with, it doesn't mean that an individual can't be supported. And also it could be that that isn't actually an adjustment for the line manager to support them with in the terms of actually supporting to a degree with to help them manage their time, as Bronwyn and Chris said earlier, checking in at certain, maybe once a day to check in on what tasks you're doing today, without micromanaging, if that's something that would help with the individual. So it's kind of a balance between, what we think of as an adjustment, which, can be strategy coaching to help us to be independent and develop our own strategies. But an adjustment can also be in the way we do things, as in a manager can potentially put in place some structures to help that individual to build up those skills, not to kind of leave them, if you like, defenseless, but to help that individual to develop their own sort of capability. And that would definitely be within, what would be termed as an adjustment. So yeah, really interesting question. Super keen to hear a bit more about the context, but I'm sure I can kind of read into it. But yeah, no, thank you very much for sharing that, Chris. Bronwyn, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No,
no,
just seconding that strategy coaching and kind of being a bit more creative about those adjustments is all about creativity. And realizing that just because one organizational technique is going to work for one neurotypical person doesn't mean that's going to work for every single brain. And having that sort of support and expertise from something like strategy coaching to help you learn what might work for your kind of for your type of brain, absolutely invaluable. So yeah, 100%.
we covered that, I think, in our interviews that were differences, people finding deadlines difficult, how they work with the organisational side. But some of the exemplary line managers, as Deborah and Bronwyn have just said, would provide and help support that process, that developing that capability. I think that's really important.
Thanks both. I guess the other thing I didn't touch on is what technological tools, assistive technology is out there that may be recommended as an adjustment to support with those cognitive skills, time management, organization as well.
That is a future project of mine, looking at how AI can support. So there we go. There's a bit of research that needs to be done in that area as well.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks. That's great. So a quick reminder just before we close, thank you very much for staying with us, for your engagement and inputs. You'll receive an email with access to the toolkit after today. It's got everything and more that we've explored today, including signposting for further support and resources. Before we leave you, though, talking about future research, we'd like to let you know about a new research opportunity following on from the remote working toolkit. Chris, can I ask you to summarise and give us some more information?
Yeah, just quickly then. So obviously this toolkit has been focused on remote workers. The next toolkit that we're working on actually as we speak, and we're actually looking for people to interview, is about on-site and it's specifically about neurodivergent workers this time, but it's again a line manager toolkit. So we're interviewing line managers who may be neurodivergent themselves or may not be, but perhaps are managing neurodivergent people, the neurodivergent on-site workers themselves. So we're looking to do that, and it'll be a very similar toolkit, but very much focused because the way things are changing now as well. Post-pandemic, we have more people working hybrid and some people back on site, of course. So that's the way forward now. So we're producing that one as well to be a kind of sister toolkit to this one. So if you're interested, my details are there. Just drop me a message and we can arrange that. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Looking forward to that. So Bronwyn, Chris, thank you so much for your input today. It's been a really great conversation. Thank you to all of you, to the audience, for coming, for your engagement, for your inputs. Looking forward to reading through the chat after today's session. And yes, please join us for another how-to webinar. Details will be released shortly. But yes, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.